Okay, so thanks for asking me to speak. As Jane said, I'm one of the renal transplant coordinators that are based at Manchester Royal Infirmary, and I'm just kind of going to give you a brief overview of my role as a transplant coordinator and talk about how patients are ultimately listed on the transplant waiting list, and a bit more of an insight into how offers work, how they're generated, and what happens when we give a call to a potential recipient to bring them in for transplant. So if you can move on, please, Jane. So from a national picture, there are around about 6,000 patients that are listed on the national transplant waiting list. And as Judith just mentioned previously, we talk about it as a transplant waiting list, when realistically it's probably more of a transplant database, really. Recently, due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, those numbers on the waiting list have kind of fluctuated as centres have closed down and temporarily suspended their transplant waiting lists. But as times have gone on, centres are now starting to open up, and those numbers are starting to increase again. So with regards to transplant centres in the UK, as I said, I'm based in Manchester. There is 23 around the country, and you will be attached to one of those transplant centres depending on what organ it is that you're listed for. So at Manchester, we mainly do kidney, pancreas and islets. And we kind of cover a large majority of the Northwest. But if you're listed for example, our main transplant patients who are listed for pancreas tend to fall out of our area just because of there's not as many transplant centres in the country. So we have patients on our list that come from Hull, York, Sheffield, Leeds. So it may find that you're attached to a transplant centre that's not necessarily in your region. If you can move on, please. So from a transplanter point of view, I'm one of the 4 recipient coordinators that are mainly for kidney and pancreas. We do have an independent islet coordinator, and there is a team of 3 live donor coordinators, and we all work together as a team of 8 of us with regards to on call, but we all have our kind of separate daytime jobs. So this talk that I'm going to give today is about the recipient side of coordination. If you can move on again, Jane, please. So my role, as I said, it's mainly to support the recipient through their transplant journey, and that will be from really the moment that they're referred into us, through their assessment, through their listing, and then ultimately through their transplant call-up and transplant. I get involved with the clinical assessment and the listing process. Recently that's changed due to COVID. We used to see patients face-to-face in clinic, but we've moved more to a virtual assessment. So a lot of my support has been over the phone within the last kind of 12 months, which has been better for us, because ultimately we sometimes struggle to see patients face-to-face in clinic due to the amount of assessments we get. We get about 400 referrals for transplant assessment a year. So we are quite busy, and we can sometimes potentially see 3 to 4, maybe 5 patients a day back when we were seeing patients face-to-face in clinic. So trying to catch all those patients face-to-face was quite difficult. So doing everything virtually has been a lot better for us, because we can call the patients up and speak to them over the phone once they've had their initial assessment with the consultant. We coordinate the call-ups on day of transplant, dealing with kidney offers, pancreas offers, and speaking to the patients when we have an organ offer for them. Following the patient's journey through the ward, seeing them to give them a bit more information about the transplant side of things, the donation side of things. And then obviously a big part of my role is to maintain the databases and the HTA requirements and NHSBT requirements post-transplant with regards to recording transplants and a lot of data collection. If you can move on, Jane, please. So as I said, this is just a kind of a step-by-step guide into my job. So my job starts with workup and referral through the assessment process, through the multidisciplinary team meeting, which our patients will attend if anything is brought up during their initial assessment that they need to be discussed at multidisciplinary team meetings. And this is mainly things like complex medical history. BMI is a big issue, and I believe that may have been brought up earlier on with regards to BMIs and weight and cutoff. And then obviously, if all being well, then it's a proceed to listing. So if you can move on for me, Jim. So there is conditions to listing, certainly in Manchester. Obviously, I'm coming from a Manchester point of view, and I'm aware that this is people from all over the country dialing in, and I'm aware that even though we do weigh things the way that I'm describing, the underpinning kind of information will be the same to whatever centre you're attached to. But in Manchester, we can activate patients on our kidney transplant waiting list if they meet the following conditions. So their EGFR will need to be less than 15 for kidney transplant, less than 20 if they're being listed for pancreas and a kidney. From a BMI point of view, ideally 30 or less, but can be up to 35 to 40 depending on assessment on the day. There is a cut-off at 40, and all patients with a BMI greater than 30 will need to go through our MDT, just so they can be discussed with the wider transplanting body. They need to be less than 65 for pancreas listing, and everybody who's listed on the transplant waiting list needs to meet satisfactory cardiac workup, whether that have an echo or some kind of stress test for pancreas listing, as well as exercise tolerance testing, and any additional testing that may be brought up during the initial assessment process. If a patient doesn't meet the above conditions, they can be listed as suspended pending sign off of any additional testing, and then it would be a case that once they meet those requirements, we can then activate them on the transplant waiting list. If you move on for me, James. So with regards to transplant offers, so we notify all patients when they're listed on the transplant waiting list. Our transplant lab will send out a letter just confirming that the patient is listed either active or suspended, the date that they're listed. And we also give patients a call when we're activating patients just to make them aware that they can potentially receive an offer of an organ. So all the organ offers are generated from what they call the NHSBT hub, which is based down in Bristol. And as I said, it manages all 6,000 patients who are currently listed on the national waiting list. And donors are registered. The information is processed at hub operations that generates a national match and run, and then offers are received to us via a page or an SMS message, which is then reviewed, and we can respond to the offer to say whether we would be happy to accept it or decline. And organs can be declined because of donor medical history. We can decline just because an organ is offered to us doesn't mean that obviously it's a donor that we'll accept. So we have 45 minutes to review the offer, and I will come to that in a bit in a little while. If you can move on for me, please, Jane. Thanks. So as kind of Judith's kind of highlighted just in the previous talk, so NHSB coordinate the offers at a national level, and the suitability is determined by a complex mathematical process, depending on blood group, how long the patient has been on dialysis, if the patient has a predicted long wait, the donor and tissue types. They take the age of the recipient and the donor into account. So when patients are listed, they will start accruing wait time, and they will get 1 point for every day that they're active on the transplant waiting list. And all the additional points that they will then get at the time of an offer will depend on this list that you can see in front of me. So patients' wait time can kind of change, their points can change depending on each offer, depending if the list there, if that changes. Next slide, please, Jane. So quickly just to talk about the donation side of things. So with regards to transplant offers, so all donors will be on an intensive care unit within the UK and will have sustained an unsurvivable injury and will be on a ventilator. So the donation side of things is coordinated by a specialist nurse in organ donation. And the specialist nurse in organ donation will confirm if the patient is on the organ donor register. Obviously, there has been a recent change in the law in March, April of last year with regards to an opt-out process now. And if that's kind of been effective, I think with the COVID and the lockdown and the suspension or anything, I think it's probably a bit too early to kind of say whether that has kind of improved the numbers of donation, and hopefully within the next couple of years we will see a benefit from that change in the law. So if a donor has been assessed by the specialist nurse in organ donation to meet donation requirements, then they will then start the withdrawal and the retrieval process. If you can then move on for me, Jane. So when we get a kidney offer or an organ offer, it's, as I said earlier on, is actually paged out to us. And a lot of people kind of think that each transplant unit has a red phone in the corner of the nurse's station, which flashes as we get a kidney offer. And it's not as exciting as that, unfortunately. So literally the duty office down in Bristol will send us a text message, and this is how the text message appears. So we can get kidney offers for named recipients, which means that the kidney offer that we have been offered is intended for a recipient on the transplant waiting list. We can get unspecified kidney offers for any recipient, which would mean that they're offering us a kidney and we can select a patient from the waiting list that we can transplant. And fast track offers are offers that have been offered by that have been declined by centres. So as I said earlier on, just because we have an offer of an organ doesn't necessarily mean that we will accept it due to other comorbidities or medical history. And they still try to offer the offers to all 23 centres. So when we have an unspecified kidney offer for a named recipient, that specifically comes to our centre, where all the fast track offers then go to all 23 centres to see if any centre in the UK would be happy to accept them. If you move on, Jen, that's great.
Sorry, Mal, sorry,
yeah.
Can I ask a quick question about this one? So I'm struggling to sort of completely understand it. Are you saying that you get a text saying that there's a donor for a specific recipient as well as a non-specific?
Yeah, so with the unspecified kidney offer, that I've blanked out the name there for confidentiality purposes, but that would have come through for a patient on our Manchester transplant waiting list. We do get offers where the hub will send out an offer for a kidney for somebody on our transplant waiting list, and it would be up to the centre to kind of choose the recipient for that kidney. Now that's not, we don't sit and we don't go through the list. I mean, 9 times out of 10 we will just go with the order of the names that we get from the hub. But there has been cases where we do get unspecified kidney offers for any recipients. It doesn't tend to happen as much as late, but all of our kind of offers tend to be named offers for particular recipients.
Great, thanks. Sorry, I was just being a bit stupid, I think, there.
No, it's absolutely fine. It is quite confusing when it comes to it, but a lot of the offers that we get are intended for named recipients. It's just the odd occasion we will get unspecified kidney offers for any recipients, and I think that's been recently changed due to donor age. I think if a donor's over the age of 70, they will then let us transplant any recipient. And then obviously if things are declined, that then goes into a fast track offer, which then goes out nationally to all transplanting centres.
Right, thank you. Did you want me to move on?
Yes, please. Yeah. So once an offer comes through, it's it's then up to the centre to review the donor information. And this is known, well, at Manchester, it's mainly done by the transplant registrar and the consultant who's on call. So this is just a front page of a document. That's how the offer comes through. But this document's about 17 pages long, so there is quite a lot of information that comes with the offer. That's then reviewed by the consultant, and if he's happy, we will then either decide to accept the offer or turn the kidney offer down, or the organ offer down. It may be necessary to discuss things with the recipients before we make those decisions. With regards to donor information and offers, that we wouldn't normally tell the recipient a lot of information unless they needed to know that information to clearly make a decision whether this would be a suitable kidney offer for them. So it may be a case that you may get a phone call from a consultant just to say, we've had a kidney offer for you, but can I just run this past you and see what your thoughts are before we accept or decline? And especially recently, due to COVID and everything, and people's concerns and worries about everything, we have done this quite a lot more than we have normally, and I think recipients kind of appreciate that call, that we're kind of involving them in the decision as to whether they want to accept a kidney offer or not. If you can move on, please, Jane. So transplant offers are kind of categorized into two different kind of donors. So we have DBD donors, which are donors who have suffered an unsurvivable brainstem death. And we have donors that are DCD donors, which are donors who are following cardiac death. Now, with regards to DBD and DCD donors, unfortunately, with DCD donors, organ donation may not go on to happen, and this is set by NHSBT that when treatment is withdrawn on a DCD donor, if the donor doesn't proceed to donation within 3 hours, then unfortunately we do stand down from the offer, and unfortunately we would then have to step down and everything. So it may be that you get quite a few phone calls, a few admissions, and when you're brought into hospital, we then get notification that the donation hasn't proceeded. If you can move on, please, Jim. So when we have accepted an offer and we go on to contact the patient, so it's important, obviously, to make aware in Manchester we're contacting patients on potential donors. So we're currently contacting them at the moment just to see if they're well. Obviously, due to COVID, if there's been any kind of recent COVID symptoms, signs, any positive tests or any isolation, if they're able to get into the hospital, find out when they last had something to eat or drink, if they're on dialysis, whether they're diabetic, and it's just a case of making sure that they are in the country. It's that we can get in touch with them. This is one of the main issues and the main sticking points that we historically used to have in Manchester, that patients would go to bed. A lot of our activity with regards to transplant activity comes out of hours. So we always tell patients that if you are going to get a call, it's very highly likely that we will be calling you in the middle of the night. So if patients go to bed, then it's to leave their phone turned on or not put their phone on silent. And there's just a lot of education around about this. If you can just move on to the next slide for me, Jane, please, briefly. So in Manchester during COVID, we have actually developed a transplant alert app where we ask all of our patients on our transplant waiting list to download this app onto their phone, and it's a means of contacting them. It bypasses their silent and it passes their do not disturb features on their phone. So if by mistake or whatever their do not disturb function came on in the middle of the night, or they turned the phone on silent, it sends out an alert that can still bypass those features, and we're able to get in touch with patients that way. And patients, it just gives the patients another link to keep in contact with us. They can update their contact information. They can send us information about if they're going on holiday or if they need to be suspended, and we can contact them with regards to blood samples. Unfortunately, due to COVID, as we launched, we then went into lockdown. So we've probably not been able to use this app as much as we would like to, but we're hoping to kind of get that going again. So that's just another way that we can get in touch with our patients. If you can move on, Jane, please. So once we have accepted an offer, obviously there's more kind of logistics to deal with. So my key role, or one of our roles when we're on call with patients, is to liaise with the patient, liaise with the ward, liaise with theatres, intensive care, especially if it's a pancreas patient. All of our patients will go to intensive care. I arrange the transportation of the organs from the donor hospital, speaking with the specialist nurse in organ donation at donor hospitals, and liaising with the transplant laboratory with regards to any additional blood samples or blood testing that we need to do on our recipients. Next slide, please, Jane. So the organ will arrive to us in a kidney cool box, and that is then obviously seen by the consultant, taken to theatre, and then the patient will then proceed to transplant. And there's a lot of, obviously, we don't know when we're going to call these patients, when we call you in for transplantation. So a lot of the time it can come as a shock that patients are getting a call at 2:30 in the morning and saying you've got 3 hours to get to the hospital. So a lot of my role recently is due to being to patient support. And if you can move on to the next slide for me, Jane, please. And a lot of the ways I give support to patients, as I briefly talked about earlier on, is that the donation itself may not go on to proceed. So it's just giving the recipient information as to why things haven't gone on to happen, making them aware that it's generally nothing to do with their blood tests or their blood results or anything, that the donation itself hasn't proceeded. Obviously, delays to the retrieval process is a big thing. So when we get offers, they're all, as I said, on potential offers and potential donors, and we may not have times for donation when we speak to you. And as the day goes on and theatre access at the donor hospital can change, that the delays in the retrievals can go on, and it's just keeping the recipient aware and up to date with any delays to the retrieval process. Obviously, additional information may come to light once we've received an offer. Specialist nurses in organ donation get additional information from GPs during working hours. So if we've accepted a kidney offer in the middle of the night, we may then find out something the following day from a GP record that we weren't aware about at the time of donation. And it's obviously keeping the recipient up to date and aware of things that can happen. We may find additional information during the retrieval that we initially weren't aware about, and it's mainly things like cancers or tumours or anything like that. And unfortunately, if that is discovered pending kind of biopsies, or we may stand down from the retrieval due to information that we find. I've said there may be donor information that needs to be discussed with the recipient before the transplant, and this can be done face to face, and it's supporting the patient that if they decide that they don't want to proceed with the transplant, following that discussion. And more recently, it's COVID-19 and the risks that patients potentially may be putting themselves to coming into the hospital to have a transplant during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we reopened our programme in July of last year following suspension for a number of months. And since about July, we've done about 153 transplants. So we've made a lot of changes to how we kind of run as a transplant unit. So it's about discussing those with the recipient to make them a bit more comfortable with regards to coming in to have a transplant during an international pandemic, really. If you can move on to the next slide, please, Jane. So some of my work that happens post-transplant is obviously once a transplant is proceeded and has gone ahead, we report the transplant to NHSBT and hub operations to have the recipient removed from the transplant waiting list. We also liaise with NHSBT with 3 and 12-month follow-up information. Going back to earlier on when I said that we decline kidneys due to various reasons, or organs due to various reasons, we would then go back and look at those turn downs to see whether we can learn anything for them, to see if they were acceptable turn downs, to see if they were then gone on to be transplanted elsewhere, and see if we can learn anything from them. And it's a lot of our big drive at the moment is donor and recipient letters. There's been a lot of work done around about this recently, about our recipients writing to donor families, and likewise donor families writing back to our recipients. So that's done as an exchange through us. And NHSBT have made things a little bit easier for recipients to write to their donor families. And it's something we encourage our recipients to do, and we've done a lot of work around that recently. So this is just a kind of an example of what we would encourage our recipients to write. We will give recipients some donor information. Unfortunately, we can't give them a lot of information due to confidentiality, and we wouldn't tell them where the organs come from or anything like that, but we will tell our recipients a donor sex and a kind of an age, a rough age, so they can kind of know how they're kind of gauging to write their letters. And if any recipients want to write a letter to our donor families, then obviously we would encourage that, and we would ask them just to get in touch with us. And I think that's it. If you can move on to the next slide for me, Jane.
Thanks, Mal. We are running late, but you know we always do. Susan, do we have any questions? I can see there's a few lots to be coming on.
The little app that you mentioned there, Mal, someone's asking if it's available in all transplant units.
So at the moment, it's something that we worked with a local developer. Now they are it is licensed, so it can, from my understanding, it can be rolled out. So I don't know if it's a way, but if someone can, I'm happy to speak to someone, or if the coordinators are able to contact us. I'm not sure if it's a recipient who's asking the question or if it's a professional, but
no, it's an audience member. It's not a non-professional.
So what we would recommend that they do, if they're able to go back to their transplant coordinators team there and obviously let them know that in Manchester we have an app. If they can get in touch with us, then we can put them in touch with the people who have developed our app. But it is an app that unfortunately is tied down to licensing, so it would be down to whether the trust would be happy to kind of take the app on board. But certainly I can put coordinators in touch. And when we did launch, we did a drive on our social media, and we did have a couple of centres get in touch with us, and we did put them in touch with the developers who have designed the app.
That's superb. You know, when you showed us some images and we've seen the box with the gift in it, it was labelled. I think it was a right kidney that was in that box.
Yeah.
Someone's asking, when it usually comes through as an unspecified kidney, does that mean it's an unspecified right or left? You don't know which side, or if it's unspecified person?
Yeah, so no, it is when it's an unspecified kidney offer, it means that at that moment in time, at the time of the offer, we don't know whether we're going to get the left kidney or the right kidney. The things that can influence that decision it tends to be that the higher centre would get the left kidney, and then if there was a centre below, they would get the right kidney. So if we had accepted a kidney, and for example, if a centre in Cardiff had accepted a kidney, if Cardiff's recipient was higher on the waiting list, then they potentially would be offered the left kidney, and then the right kidney would come to Manchester.
So Mal, does that? And this may seem obvious, but are we therefore saying that a right kidney has to be put into the right side of the body, and a left kidney has to go in the left? You can't do. Is that what you mean?
No. I think am I right in thinking that the question was which kidney, if
yes, it was about more the unspecified aspect. So no, it was unspecified recipient or unspecified left or right.
Yeah, no, it's at the time of the offer that the kidney that we're being offered at that moment in time, it hasn't been decided whether it's the left kidney or the right kidney that we will be offered. If at the time of the offer we know that the left kidney is good, we do get right kidney for a certain patient. But if it's unspecified, it's the organ that's unspecified, not the recipient.
Lovely. And one thing you touched on, and we are aware of it, whether I think a lot of the audience are, if they're in social media groups, of people getting the call, then it not going ahead. You did touch on that, and as part of your role, you offered that the support for those people.
Yeah.
When people are called and you get that call to say we have a kidney or a potential kidney, do you know if it's your number one for that kidney, or potentially are you the person in waiting as a backup?
Yeah, so when we get the offer for obviously the named offers that come through, so if an offer comes through for a particular patient, they're the first choice recipient. We would then get a backup name at the point of when we speak to our transplant lab to let them know that we've had an offer for this patient, and we would always ask the lab if they can then look at the next recipient on the waiting list. And if it was a case that when we call patients, we will tell them whether they're first choice or backup. It hasn't been as much as an issue during current lockdown, because obviously we're not bringing on patients unnecessarily into hospital. So we haven't really been contacting backup patients over the last kind of 12 months. We've always just been contacting the first choice recipient. Obviously, if the first choice recipient is unfit or when we speak to them, we will then have to offer that kidney back to the hub, because it may need to be offered to another centre. Just because we have a kidney offer doesn't mean we can then keep that kidney for another recipient. It could be that nationally on the waiting list there is other people in between our first choice and our second choice recipient.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. I don't want to ask any more because we're running over so much now for time. Thanks, Mal.